Have you been diagnosed with ADHD or autism, but something still doesn't add up? Maybe you've read the traits, taken the quizzes, and it doesn't quite fit. That's where the term AuDHD comes in. It's shorthand for someone who's both autistic and ADHD. And when both are present, traits can clash, get masked, or be mistaken for something else. So today, we're breaking down what ADHD looks like, what autism looks like, and how to tell when it's both. Let's start with ADHD. ADHD is diagnosed as one of three types: inattentive, hyperactive impulsive, or combined, based on patterns of inattention, restlessness, or impulsivity that interfere with daily life. Inattentive type includes things like zoning out, missing details, seeming not to listen, or struggling to finish tasks. You might misplace things, avoid mentally demanding work, or forget steps in your routine. Hyperactive impulsive type looks like fidgeting, interrupting, restlessness, blurting things out, or talking too fast. Even if your body stays still, you might feel like it's constantly moving. Combined type means you meet full criteria for both. It's the most common but often missed in people who mask well or excel in structured settings. Why? Well, because those traits don't always look like a problem, especially in childhood. Daydreaming, disorganization, or nonstop talking might have been framed as creativity, or being bright but scattered, especially if you had strong grades or verbal skills. But underneath, you were zoning out, forgetting steps, and quietly falling behind. Perfectionism became the mask that hid the chaos but never fixed it. And that doesn't go away with age. The traits stay, but they shift. Hyperactivity turns into mental restlessness and racing thoughts. Impulsivity shows up in conversations, emotional reactions, or saying yes too fast. Inattention becomes task switching, lost items, skip steps, sometimes getting so overwhelmed that nothing gets done at all. This isn't laziness, it's a persistent pattern that disrupts routines, relationships, and your ability to function even when you're trying your hardest. That's what makes ADHD more than a personality trait. It affects how your brain regulates attention, motivation, and action. But for many of us, ADHD isn't the full story. Now let's look at autism. It's typically described as showing up in two core areas. The first involves how you communicate and connect with people, and the second includes patterns in your behavior, interests, and sensory responses. So let's start with communication. This might include missing subtle cues, taking things literally, or needing more time to process what's been said before responding. You might struggle with the rhythm of conversations, especially in fast-paced groups or with people you don't know well. It can be hard to read tone or facial expressions, and even harder to adjust how you speak in the moment. Often, social interaction comes with a tension you can physically feel, like your body is resisting the connection. It's almost like trying to push two magnets together and feeling them push back. And unfortunately, the other person feels it too. That mutual disconnect is part of why relationships can be so hard. Not because you don't care, but because the signals just don't line up. This mismatch in communication is known as double empathy, and it's tied to how autistic and non-autistic brains process the world. It's not something you can fix by trying harder, but autism isn't just about communication. It also affects how you experience your environment, manage change, and find comfort in the familiar. This might look like preferring routines, getting deeply focused on specific topics, or repeating certain movements or phrases. You might react strongly to noise, texture, or light, or sometimes not react at all. And even if you've gotten good at hiding it, sudden changes can still throw you off more than people realize. These aren't just quirks, they're part of how your brain processes the world, shaping what you notice, how you act, and what throws you off balance. And even though these traits show up early in life, they're often overlooked, especially in kids who seem to be doing well on the surface. You might have stayed quiet, followed the rules, or kept to yourself. Adults called you mature, thoughtful, or self-disciplined, but not autistic. If you copied your peers to blend in, you were seen as polite or observant. If you double checked your work or avoided breaking rules, they called you careful or well behaved. But if you insisted on doing things a certain way, pushed back when something felt unfair, or corrected others, you were more likely labeled bossy, difficult, or controlling. And if you reacted strongly to textures, sounds, or changes, well, then you were just picky, fussy, or too sensitive. Because you didn't match the stereotypes and seemed to be holding it together, no one thought to look any deeper. As an adult, those same patterns often continue, but in subtler ways. You might plan out what you're going to say, not to sound polished, but to avoid saying the wrong thing. You might avoid group settings with unclear expectations or freeze when it's your turn to speak, even if you had something to say a second ago. You might come across as outgoing, but it's often a performance, a carefully rehearsed version of connection that completely drains you. Maybe you eat the same meals regularly, not because you're rigid, but because it avoids surprise textures or decision fatigue. Perhaps you rewatch the same show, not out of habit, but because you already know what's coming, and that's calming. Or you might get deeply absorbed in a project or hobby because that focus brings clarity when everything else feels chaotic. From the outside, you might be seen as particular or even intense, but underneath, there's often a quiet effort to manage your energy, to code the moment, and avoid sensory or social overwhelm. That effort usually started early, and for many of us, it never really stopped. It just got quieter, more automatic, and harder to notice. And that is part of why AuDHD so often goes unrecognized, because once masking becomes second nature, you stop noticing that you're hiding, not just from other people, but from yourself. So before we can really understand what it means to be both ADHD and autistic, we have to look at how the traits interact. AuDHD isn't just a combination. Some traits amplify each other, others clash or camouflage one another. That overlap can make it hard to tell where one trait ends and the other begins. One way to see this is through shared challenges like executive dysfunction and emotional regulation. They show up in both ADHD and autism, but often for different reasons, and that difference matters. If you only recognize one presentation, you might miss the full picture. Take executive dysfunction, for example, which creates challenges with planning, initiating tasks, staying focused, switching between activities, and managing time. In ADHD, it usually centers on motivation and momentum. You might know exactly what to do, but unless that task feels urgent or interesting, your brain just won't engage. You lose track of steps. You get distracted midstream. You stop and start again and again. In autism, it's often more about needing predictability. You might need to mentally walk through every step before you begin, and if something feels out of order or unpredictable, you freeze. When you're ADHD, you might spend hours planning how to start and still feel unable to begin. Your ADHD makes it hard to initiate tasks, while your autism makes it hard to face the unknown. So instead of moving forward, you get stuck, caught between too many ideas and too much hesitation. Now let's talk about emotional regulation. In ADHD, it's often about emotional impulsivity. Your emotions hit fast and hard. You might react before processing the situation and then struggle to come back down. In autism, the challenge usually comes from slower emotional processing, heightened sensory sensitivity, or difficulty identifying feelings. You might not notice how you feel until long after the moment has passed, or you just can't put it into words. When you're ADHD, you may react intensely before you even understand why, only to replay the moment over and over when clarity arrives hours later. You cry without warning. You go numb when you are expected to react. You say something you instantly regret, and you're not even sure why you said it. That kind of emotional whiplash is common in both ADHD and autism, but if you find yourself constantly unsure why you react the way you do, or torn between opposite urges, that might be something else. One of the clearest signs that you might be both autistic and ADHD is that your brain often has two distinctly different responses to the same situation. This contradiction isn't just confusing, it can stall momentum, erase your coping strategies, and make it nearly impossible to explain what's going on, even to yourself. So let's look at three types of contradictions that tend to show up in AuDHD. The first is the kind that turns desire into distress. For example, ADHD seeks novelty while autism needs predictability. When you're AuDHD, well, you might crave new experiences just for the stimulation, but as soon as you're in it, the unpredictability hits hard. You're overwhelmed, overstimulated, unsure how to process it all. Or you might plan something exciting, then cancel last minute because the unknown suddenly feels too unsafe. It's not a lack of interest or follow through, it's that your desire for stimulation clashes with your need for control. So you chase what you want only to shut down when you finally get it. The second type of contradiction removes your fallback strategies. Autistic communication may be slow or blunt, but it's often careful, precise, and intentional. ADHD communication is faster and more impulsive, but the ability to interpret reactions and adjust is still there. But when you're both, you might speak too soon and miss a moment to recover. The impulsivity overrides your filter, and social blind spots keep you from catching it. So you're left without the strengths of either, just the impact without a buffer. The third type of contradiction changes how people see you and how you see yourself. ADHD can make you seem animated, spontaneous, even charismatic in short bursts. Autism can make you cautious, structured, or slow to respond, especially in groups. When you're both, you might come across as outgoing or adaptable, but that impression is often misleading. Maybe you're quick to speak, but only because you rehearsed some moment in your head 10 times. Maybe you seem relaxed in unfamiliar settings, but only because you're masking the rising discomfort in your body. What people see as confidence is often hypervigilance. What they see as flexibility is usually exhaustion with a smile. And over time, that disconnect between how you present and how you feel makes it harder to trust your own experience. If that kind of internal contradiction has been there as long as you can remember, you're not imagining it. You've probably been navigating this tension since childhood, even if no one properly labeled it. Maybe you were too much and not enough in the same breath. You might have been called gifted, sensitive, intense, or stubborn, picky, and hard to manage. But even then, you were already trying not to say the wrong thing, trying not to get overwhelmed or mess it up, and trying to hold everything together, even when it was too much. Now, as an adult, you're still trying, but it's quieter. It looks like routines, overthinking, holding back when you want to speak because you don't trust yourself. You prepare for things that never happen and that no one else is even worried about. You hold it together until you don't, and then crash in silence, unsure why it got so hard so fast. So, what do you do with this information? Well, if this feels familiar, it's worth exploring further. Start tracking your thoughts and behaviors over time in different settings. See if you notice patterns. Consider a formal evaluation. If you pursue one, make sure the clinician understands how autism and ADHD can present together. Not all do. Also, find supportive spaces that recognize the overlap and where both are discussed. Understanding how these traits interact won't solve everything, but it will give you a starting point. That clarity makes self-advocacy a whole lot easier. If this helped you understand what you're dealing with, please consider joining my Patreon, where I offer live support calls and deeper resources for AuDHD adults. You could join for free, and you can find the details in the video description below. Thank you so much for joining here today. I'll see you next time.